Exactly. Okay, so let's restart. So
Right.
thank you very much, Jacob, for joining us today. I will introduce you in a few minutes, and thank you to the audience. I'm sure that some more people will join us while I'm finishing the presentation. So I just want to spend some few words in introducing the seminar.
Yep, that one. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so this is a social movements and political action seminar series. It is a series that has been existing for 12 years in October. So it started in October 2014. It's a monthly seminar, so it's a lot of work, kind of self-managed work. But here we are with a lot of good speaker and invited speakers as Jacob today, presenting very different fields of research broadly connected social movements, political action. Like the term seminar today is not directly connected, but still has to do with the big areas of how people engage with politics as a whole and public policies as a whole. So this is our website. You can have a look. Usually our sections are recorded if they are hybrid as today's session, or they are fully online, so they are of course recorded, and you can find all the events here. And we have been addressing many different topics, such as the consequence of social movements in Italy, public life, private life, public action, how housing politics mobilize citizens in Moscow, environmental movements. And also the objective of this seminar is to address not only the areas that are usually addressed by social movement studies and by this kind of field, but also areas that many times are underrepresented, like sub-Saharan Africa. We take advantage, or Far East. We take advantage also of the connection that here at ISCTE we have with colleagues working African studies. And also we explore different tools to address this topic, this broad topic of political action and engagement that we see as something much larger than just participating in elections in an institutional way. Also we address the infrastructures of participation, the networks, we explore different methodologies, and that's why we have always presenters from very different areas, from sociology, political science, anthropology, social psychology, urban studies, architecture, and many more. But now I will stop here, and I will introduce our today guest. So thank you very much. So to Jacob Thomas has a PhD from the University of Chicago and a bachelor from Berkeley. UCLA.
Master's from Chicago.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, that's true. My eyes are kind of lying to me. He's an assistant professor in sociology department of Corvinus University of Budapest and research fellow at Princeton University Center for Migration Development. He used mixed methods to address different topics, such as the topic at the core of the book that he's presenting today. So why more people do not migrate or travel internationally, migrant selectivity, the limited ability of states to control migration, and how migratory opportunities are stratified along a variety of intersecting dimensions. He has published widely in different hubs, such as Theory and Society, International Migration, the European Journal of Sociology, International Migration Review, and International Journal of Sociology. He's presenting today is forthcoming book. Well, it's not more forthcoming. I think it's been
July.
But it already has a proper page on the website of the publisher, on the Nile, Deterrence and Disenchantment, Why Many Never Immigrate, with Cambridge University Press. And thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
And you have the floor.
Great. All right, so I'm going to share screen, and hopefully there won't be any issues doing that. Good. Okay, I see the screen, and then I click on this one. And you can see my... Okay, great. So, hi everybody. This is a long running project that was became my dissertation and is now a book. And this project really has a really biographical kind of origin. And for this particular setting, it's interesting to think about ways in which we consider phenomenon as political or not political or merely policy or merely an administrative issue. I think a lot of it has to do how contested it is. And I think a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is not really contested politically, but you can imagine if it were. In fact, that's partly why I look at it. I think we as social scientists are very interested in groups of people that are overlooked or marginalized in society. What I'm going to be discussing today are very much people that exist outside the margins of really our awareness as a lot of scholars. In particular, I'm interested in the subject I'm going to talk today is basically what I'm going to call potential immigrants, people that might have immigrated into societies but didn't. And with a kind of nod to echo of Marx, I title my introduction "The Spectre of Potential Immigrants Haunts International Migration Research." But this has is really rooted in my biographical background, because I grew up in California in a very multicultural, multiracial, multi-ethnic area. And as I was growing up, I had a lot of friends who were from or had families that were from other countries. But I was relatively ignorant in the United States of where they were from. And I understood as I did my undergraduate studies in globalization, I began to read and see lots of photos and videos of what other societies were like. But it was only in the period between when I did my undergraduate degree and my master's degree at Berkeley, and then I did a master's degree in Chicago, that I decided I wanted to find my PhD study subject and research question by traveling widely through the world and sort of coming up with a research project that would be original, really groundbreaking. And so I spent okay, we got a little get there. I spent around 6-7 years traveling and staying in the homes of people in around 125 countries, and I saw the poverty, limited opportunities, and lack of freedom in other societies, and I really wondered why so few people, more people, didn't migrate or travel abroad. And of course, after I invited enough of my hosts in those countries to visit and stay with me in California, and they laughed, knowing how difficult that would be, I realized that it was immigration and visa policy was a major reason why many people were so immobile. And I only later learned that social forces interacted with such policies in more subtle ways, so that it wasn't just the visa policies, but also the way they intersected with the various types of social forces. And then when I was applying for PhD programs, I was surprised to learn that most of the research about migration focuses on immigrants and refugees and people that actually come. And there's a relatively less research about people that are immobile, who don't migrate. And of course, you have the famous work by Johan Carling about the involuntary immobility of potential migrants in Cabo Verde. But at that time, unlike more recently, there wasn't a lot of thought about what Caroline Schell calls the mobility bias in research. So why do we have this epistemological blind spot in the international migration field? Well, there's many reasons. One is there's an assumption by modern governments and society that to be settled in population and not to move or migrate from it is what is normal. Even though we have an extensive history of human nomadism, and on average, we find from Gallup that around 16% of the world's population, ranging from 4 to 37%, depending on where, say they would like to live in another country if they had a chance. There's also a tendency in social scientists, when they do research, to do what King, Verba, and Cohane in their book on methodology call selecting on the dependent variable. And there's a tendency to only look at positive cases of something happening rather than contrast them to negative counterfactual cases. And an obvious reason is that it's very difficult to observe cases of when something doesn't exist and to really kind of run counterfactual experiments. Then we have this, what the political philosopher Iris Marion Young calls the creeping demands of immediacy. What she meant by this is that immigrants who come here tend to demand our attention, that we deal with their presence and research them, because they are here with us and we can see that they're marginalized. We don't see the people outside the society that would like to come but don't. The potential migrants who exist outside the margins of our awareness. And most researchers are doing this research in migrant destination societies, and they may not have so much interaction with people, potential migrants, as they do with immigrants. Positionality is another reason. Who has done this social science research? I do this very informal historiographic analysis of migration research, and I show how until 50 years ago, most social scientists' migration were white middle-class men in wealthy democratic societies, and surprise, surprise, they tend to research people like themselves, other white middle-class migrants, predominantly from Europe, and only recently have we had a diversification in the academy with more women, with more racial, ethnic, and religious minorities, so that we have moved to also looking at other groups, such as women. We moved on to first looking mostly at men coming from Northern and Western Europe in the U.S., then looking at legal white male migrants from Southern and Eastern Europe and Ireland, who tend to be more marginalized. And then you have the Mexico Migration Project of Doug Massey, which looked at the closest and largest source of immigrants for the U.S. That would be Mexico. I'm sure in Europe you've had a lot of research about migrants from Morocco, given how many come to Spain, a lot of migrants from for example, Turkey, given how many came to Germany. And then over time, we moved on to second-generation immigrants as those immigrants came and had children. And then we started to look at immigrants from Asia and Africa and other parts of Latin America. And then we even come up with these other categories of that are legislatively created, like people seeking asylum, refugees, people who are at temporary protected status because of things that are going on in their country of origin, people that have these other types of my immigration status, like DACA in the United States, and all these other type of irregular migrants. So we've gradually expanded the pool of what we look at in terms of the people that have come, but we're still relatively less attention on people that counterfactually haven't come, but might have had our immigration policies not been so restrictive and social forces toward immigration not being so hostile. Final reason is that there's a we have methodologically nationalist governments who want to with taxpayer money, do research that is in the national interest. And so a lot of the funding opportunities have been about assimilating and acculturating the immigrants that are already come to society, rather than trying to bring in more or think about why more people aren't coming. So the way what I'm going to focus a lot on this presentation is not so much on the methods. I'm happy to talk about that in the Q&A. I will just say that the main source of data is data that I've collected myself. I'll discuss that in a bit. And I've done most of the data I've collected is survey data, oral history interviews, and data, mostly text data from social media and other digital platforms. But what I want to be us to be thinking about in this context is how there's different stages of selection in terms of who actually comes to the migrant destination society. These potential migrants, if we separate them from the people that are just disinterested from migrating, they kind of often go into what I'm going to talk about as three different groups, although people can move between the groups. So I'm going to focus more on mechanisms. But for this purpose of this diagram, we can talk about the people that want to come, but because of the immigration or visa policy is too restrictive and in effect, socioeconomically or through social lack of social capital disqualifies them, they are deterred. They're people that would like to go abroad legally, but they're not willing to go abroad and take the risk of going migrating illegally, and therefore they're deterred from applying because they don't have the resources to go the only way they would want to go, which is legally. Next, we have those that are denied the visa. They get to the visa counter, they try to apply, and the government denies them. And finally, we have what I call the disenchanted. And these are people that start to migrate, and they arrive in the country of destination, but they don't ultimately settle there, and they go back to their country of origin. Then you have the potential immigrants and those that we study being the immigrants, the unauthorized, who become either authorized immigrants by adjusting status from a non-immigrant visa, authorized immigrants entering with a visa, or non-immigrant visa overstayers. And in this project, I'm not looking at populations of people that are coming in without a visa. That's not what I'm considering here. What I do with this book is to extend the push-pull model, which is a model that basically tries to explain why people migrate due to push factors in the country of origin, like war, civil unrest, economic recession, restrictions on political freedom, weak property rights, corruption, and climate change, and pull factors in the country of destination, which are gender, ethnic, religious equality, more political freedom, higher wages, rule of law, better technology, more personal space, and better work-life balance. What I want to balance this with is to expand this push-pull model to a push-retain-pull-repel model, which also takes into account these retained forces in the country of origin and these repel forces in the country of destination. Retained factors include factors like the local and professional ties that people have that are of they're not able to benefit from once they migrate. Aging parents that need of care, work promotions, having a mortgage or a challenge in selling one's property. And then you have these repel factors in the country of destination, like racial, ethnic, religious discrimination, language barriers, credentialing barriers, cultural alienation, and a lack of upward and occupational mobility. So we have this immobility paradox. Also, it's another contribution of this research. And this is that the very things that facilitate migration, which are social ties and socioeconomic status, and give people opportunities, these sort of aspects of people, these types of capital also discourage migration. If you think about a person's social ties in their country of origin, if they have a lot of social capital, those social ties may also discourage them. Similarly, socioeconomic status actually can raise the cost of migration because somebody has more to lose. And so due to this, what I call the immobility-mobility paradox, or the immobility paradox, in short, via state immigration policy constraining a person's ability, and via individual preferences constraining aspiration, these social ties and socioeconomic status also constrain and limit persons' willingness to migrate. And then I also my third kind of theoretical kind of framework is that I'm interested in how people are socioeconomically, these different potential migrants are socioeconomically stratified. And the way I think about this is the people on the bottom are those that are deterred. So my advisor, Ming Zhou, and her co-author, Alejandro Portes, have already shown how immigrants are stratified. They upward assimilate into the upper classes and the upper middle classes. You have ethnic middle class assimilation, where a lot of people retain their identity. And then you have this downward assimilation into the lower classes of the society destination. But similarly, what I'm going to show in this work is that the potential migrants are also stratified with respect to the immigrants. In the country of origin, those that upward assimilate tend to be often those that also have a good life in their country of origin, and because when they arrive in a country of destination, they often become disenchanted and they give up on immigrating. From the middle classes, the middle classes of society tend to attract, from them we tend to attract the immigrants, often because they believe they will have a better life in the country of destination. And finally, you have at the bottom this voluntary non-immigration, which are the people that in the lower middle classes that are denied the visas, and the people somewhat below them that are deterred from applying. So the objective of this project is to demonstrate why more people don't migrate, but there wasn't really any data set on this. So I did a study known as the Potential Immigrant Survey, and the goal was to obtain detailed demographic, socioeconomic, social relation related data about potential immigrants across China who once aspired to immigrate into another society but did not immigrate due to visa denial, deterrence in applying for visas, and becoming disenchanted with immigration. So I'm going to, with the remaining time, go very quickly through the different parts of the book and talk about the different, what I found. So in the second chapter, titled What Ties Individuals to Society, How Immobility Capital Stratifies International Mobility and Migration, I begin with the story of an encounter I had with a student visa applicant who, like many applicants, was confused about why they didn't get the visa. And it seemed to me to be an important thing to kind of investigate. So a lot of people come in on these non-immigrant visas. In fact, far more come on into our countries on non-immigrant or temporary visas than those come on in with immigrant visas, who enter without inspection, and much, much more than come in as asylees and refugees. And the reason that many people get denied visas is because they aren't able to show to the U.S. visa officers, and I can show you, I find it similar with other visa officers of other countries, that they're not able to prove that they have strong enough ties to their country of origin that they have no reason to abandon. So I define immobility capital as a symbolic and paradoxical type of capital that signifies an individual's home ties to their country of residence that effectively make them seem like they're immobilized from permanently immigrating. They'll go abroad as a tourist and come back, and therefore they can be trusted with the privilege of temporary international legal mobility. And in a simple model here, I show that men, those that hold household registration and a very common source of undocumented migration in China, Fujian province. I know in Spain, in Spain a lot of people come from Zhejiang, but also all over the world, a lot of people come unauthorized from Fujian. Those that use a visa agent, those that were in a disadvantaged ethnic group, and those that would immigrate if they had opportunity were more likely to were less likely to get the visa. But what I find is interesting is that those that would immigrate, if say after they come out of the embassy, they would immigrate, they had an opportunity, had a higher odds of getting a visa. So then I put in all these socioeconomic status variables as well as social tie variables. And I find that those that have a visa at an OECD country are more likely to obtain a visa. Those that had someone pay for their trip, that had occupational prestige, who had more years of education, attended a selective school, attended studied STEM, were more likely to get a visa, and those that worked more years of their current job, whereas those that had more siblings were less likely to get a visa, and those that had a child under 20 years old were less likely to get a visa, and those that had a family member who could sponsor from an immigrant visa were less likely to get a visa, and those that had higher self-confidence were more likely to get a visa. And nonetheless, after you control for all these things, those that said after their visa application result that they would immigrate into the U.S. if they had an opportunity were more likely to get a visa. So I found that very fascinating. I also find that there's an interaction over the life course where as people age, those that are married and those that have a child and don't have children are more likely to get a visa than otherwise. And then I also show that some of these immobility capital factors, namely whether they have an OECD country visa and their years of education, are also strongly associated with whether they get a visa, whether they are interested in immigrating. So what we have is that immobility capital constituting socioeconomic status and social ties seems to be both associated with visa approval, but also a willingness to immigrate into the U.S. So that's kind of the main contribution of this. And I show that there's certain conceptual features that contribute more to immobility capital, those that strengthen with age and with social relations, and those that require cultivation over time in terms of socioeconomic status. And those that contribute little to immobility capital are those that weaken with age, and those that offer fungible and transferable SES resources that have less value in terms of socioeconomic status. In this next chapter, I'm looking at how these non-immigrant visa applicants that are denied strategically present their non-immigrant self, and how this undermines this non-immigrant binary within the group of people that are applying for these visas. And this applicant was complaining basically how he's very wealthy and he has a lot of income and he bought his daughter even a house to stay in, but he was just shocked that they would deny him a visa, even though, as I showed previously, that there's no statistically significant difference within the group of people applying for these visas, those that have more income and those that don't, and those that have more wealth and don't. And the way I explain this, and I'm going to go through this chapter more briefly, is that there's something called the dual intent doctrine, which is a provision, a doctrine that encourages you as visa officers to apply a strict standard of immigrant intent to low conversion visa applicants while not denying high conversion visa applicants. And by low conversion visa applicants, I mean people that are applying for tourist visas, but they're not going to deny student visas, highly skilled worker visas, and cultural exchange visitor visas to those that are even likely to pursue permanent residency after they arrive in the U.S. as opportunities opened up. And in terms of how applicants answer questions and present their motivation, I find that immobility capital is not as important to demonstrate for those applying for high conversion visas as those applying for low conversion visas. And I assess the different ways in which low conversion visa applicants and high conversion visa applicants present their non-immigrant self in answering questions to surveyors and visa applicants about their motivations. And then I just go through and show the type of words that people use in describing how they decided to go abroad. And the low conversion visa group are very different than the word clouds generated from the text of people that are high conversion visas. And this thing on the right is what's called a latent Dirichlet allocation model that shows the type of terms that show up for three different groups. One that's more focused on travel, like business visas, another that's focused more on kind of travel, and the third that's focused more on study. We also see similar patterns emerging when we ask, why do you want to go to the US rather than another country? And when we ask about what questions the officer asks and how did they answer, we find also different kind of ways in which they interact with the officer. We also find differences between men and women in terms of how people justify whether they're going to immigrate or not, with most people mentioning lifestyle, culture, and patriotism, and in a slightly lesser extent, family ties. And then the third kind of most common response is about job and wealth benefits. So basically, the dual intent doctrine effectively stratifies non-immigrants and determines which ones tend to get denied visas. Now I'm going to move on to deterrence. In this fourth chapter, titled The Gendered Way Familial Ties Reduce International Migration Mobility, I'm basically looking at people like this young woman who want to go abroad, but they don't eventually because they feel that their parents wouldn't allow them, and family members oppose them. And they say, I feel like this is an obsession. It keeps me up at night. And they have this deep regret. And very briefly, the way I explain this in this chapter is that there's an interaction. The kind of puzzle is that we find that the parents are more opposed to the women going abroad than the men, even though this is a society that the kinship system is patrilocal, patrilineal, and patriarchal. And the way there's also a lot of traditions, though. One is filial piety, where the child feels they have a duty to take care of their parent. And then there's this paternalistic influence that a lot of the parents have over their child's career, education, and marital choices. This is in turn motivated by the fact that parents are concerned about their child's physical, cultural, linguistic survival in the country or survival in the foreign country, the limited economic resources and the priorities of the family that are channeled through the child-parent resource dependence. And finally, this extra-familial peer pressure and social norms that parents face from neighbors and other family members to have socioeconomically successful married child and grandchildren in their society of origin and not having their child move away. I'm going to skip through these different examples, but they're all here. And I'm going to move on to another chapter, and which you can't. I'm worried that maybe people sharing the screen can't see the top part.
You can just click on more.
More.
And hide floating meeting controls. Here.
Okay. Cool. So now you can read the top part. This chapter is titled Not Settled Enough to Be Internationally Mobile, How Deadlines in the Life Course Schedule Deter Potential Immigrants. And what I'm looking at here are the ways in which a lot of what society expects of us, those normative expectations, often constrain our ability to travel or migrate abroad. This might not be such the case in a wealthy migrant destination society like Portugal, but it is very much the case in a lot of societies of migrant origin, where there's a lot of opportunity costs and trade-offs in terms of what people are capable of doing in terms of migration and fulfilling those life course expectations. And here, we have a lot sort of general life course schedule of a lot of migrants, where you have these life course anchors. A lot of these things are both the foundation for building social ties and socioeconomic status that facilitate migration, but they also retain and constrain potential immigrants from going abroad. And this is really the test of the what I remember I called earlier the immobility paradox. People talked about going abroad as being unrealistic. This is often due to financial responsibilities and expectations. Some say parents will say, I'll allow you to go to abroad when you get married, after you buy a house, after you go to college, after you get a job, after you give birth to your first child. But always there's another expectation, and all these sort of expectations put constraints on what a person's capable of doing. And a lot of people just feel guilty about going abroad in China. In doing so, they endlessly defer their opportunities to go abroad. What ends up happening often is that deterred first-generation immigrant parents pass on their dreams to their second-generation immigrant children, and they realize that not going to have an opportunity in their lifetime to migrate abroad, but they raise their child in such a way to have more opportunity to do so. And this is like an example of a manager in a state-owned at a state-owned enterprise who was deterred abroad like his wife, but they have strategically raised their child because they believe their education in China was insufficient, and they want their daughter to grow up to be more successful, and therefore they want her to have an education abroad. Of course, then people retire, and a lot of these potential immigrants who were retired, and older people talked about how they would have liked to immigrate when they were younger, but now that they're older, find that the cultural barriers and are more intimidating and are more deterring for them to do so. I also validate one of my models from the non-immigrant visa, and I split my data into like a training set and a testing set. And what I show that is on a random 80% of my data, I train my model, and then I validate it with 20%, and I find it has about 68% accuracy of predicting who gets a visa or not amongst those I surveyed who were deterred. And then I do a graphical plot of the receiver operating characteristic curve, which suggests that around 91% of those deterred applicants in my sample who were deterred would not obtain a visa if they were to apply. And therefore, we can say that most people are what you would call successfully deterred, in the sense that they don't apply for the visa, but they would not get the visa if they applied. So then you can consider China as kind of a salient case of how life course expectations interact with immigration policy to deter potential immigrants. And since other low-income and middle-income migrant origin countries are also very collectivist and family-oriented, they often also hold strong normative expectations and pressures about meeting those deadlines in the life course schedule. So one can just consider my data from China as a salient case of potential migrants in terms of how those expectations within other contexts in more subtle ways, like Portugal, may shape individual choices and limit people's decisions about migrating and going abroad. And these are the sort of pressures you could be even present in Portugal, but I think they're especially the case in a lot of migrant origin countries like in Africa and Latin America, where people still also have a lot more collectivist and family-oriented orientations. And therefore, I think this reveals how going outside of one's society is in many contexts a really socially norm-violating deviant behavior. in the sense that it allows people to free themselves of society's cultural and social constraints and normative expectations, and how those normative expectations deter a lot of people in the way they interact with the policy. So now I'm going to move on to the disenchantment, and I just start with this quote really quick. I'm not going to read it, but it's basically ex-immigrant of Sweden, Switzerland, and the United States, and by ex-immigrant, I mean somebody who has migrated abroad, who gave up on immigrating. And she was just kind of annoyed by how there was kind of this very romantic portrayal of a lot of immigrants, particularly from China. And the assumption is always that the society of migrant destination is better. But in her opinion, that in her time, based on her time having spent abroad, she didn't really feel that migrant destination societies offered her such a great quality of life as she could have in China, given problems like gun violence and drug abuse and crime and such. So when I'm talking about ex-immigrants, I'm talking about a subset of return migrants. I'm not talking about people that came to a country who intended to go back all along, but these are people who had transformations in their subjectivity whereby they decided over time that they didn't want to immigrate. And these are, of course, different from immigrants and transnational migrants, transmigrants or dual nationals that live lives across borders in migrant origin and migrant destination societies. What I find is that when I did ask people to list the most when I looked at the reasons in my oral history data, which is 121 core ex-immigrant interviewees of around 12 different countries in Asia, North America, and Europe, most of them most frequently mentioned cultural alienation as the reason they didn't immigrate, and secondarily just generalized disappointment and barriers to socioeconomic mobility, and also career opportunities. Fewer people mentioned language barrier and racial ethnic discrimination and visa regulations, and even fewer mentioned these kind of general, what I'll call gender disfluencies or difficulties in adapting to gender norms. What I find is that disappointment and boredom, that the restrictive immigration and visa policy, racial ethnic discrimination, and the language barrier and barriers to socioeconomic and occupational mobility relative to the origin society are the more macro structural factors, but they tend to be channeled through experiences of disappointment and boredom with the destination society, difficulty navigating gender norms, and cultural alienation. And these all contribute to the decision to give up, immigrate, and are what is sociologically formative of this ex-immigrant subjectivity and becoming disenchanted with this immigrant dream, what I call the immigrant dream. So I'm going to, for lack of time, zip through. There's a lot of different examples of disappointment, language barriers, cultural alienation, loneliness, and homesickness, racial ethnic discrimination, navigating unfamiliar gender norms, the limited opportunities for socioeconomic and career mobility relative to China, visa restrictions. But in the end, this is focusing on these gradual processes, and we do see parallels between other transformations of subjectivity. For example, when you have a dissolution of a relationship or decoupling, a marriage, a partnership, but also differences and also similarities and differences with other transformations of subjectivity, like a loss in faith in a conversion from one's religion and political party of orientation, which we've seen a lot of recently. I'm going to move on quickly. I'm going to move on to chapter 7, which looks at more of these sudden shocks. And I want to spend a little more time on this because there's something a little more about political action that emerges from this. And this is looking at what types of sudden shocks end these immigration projects. And what this quote talks about is this is an ex-immigrant from the Netherlands and Britain, female, age 25, who really loved the life of being an immigrant in Europe, but when one of her friends went to the U.S. for her studies and she died in an accident, she started to question, do I want to die here? Do I want to die at a place where I don't have permanent connections? I started to think, what if my grandparents died while I was there? Suddenly it seems like you want to get close to people and family to get that feeling of being home back, feeling rooted, feeling you can relax, don't have to watch your back, not knowing how exactly the system works and not even needing to constantly figure out how the system works because you are at home where you have a feeling of being safe. I just wanted to get back that feeling back. And what we're dealing with here is this kind of concept of ontological security, which is this feeling that you have of being kind of having a stable sense of self and self-efficacy and a kind of being rooted in where you are. And I argue that because social support often enables people to endure certain shocks, I'm interested in how this might vary at the micro level, the meso level, and the macro level. And the way I look at this is I look at, for the micro level, how ex-immigrants reacted to illnesses, deaths, relationships, dissolution, and relationship dissolution with those dear to them, how they reacted to rapid increases in anti-Asian hate crimes at the meso level, and at the macro level, how they reacted to COVID-19's impact on society, which impacted everybody. And my idea was that social support would vary between these different levels, because they'd have a lot of social support that maybe at the micro level, less so within their group at the meso level, and the least of all at the macro level, because it's impacting everybody. Those that are impacted may be less available to give support. So I look at micro-level shocks of illnesses, deaths, and dissolution of relationships, and I show that how, yes, a lot of people who had these experiences of parents and either getting very sick or dying, or people in their country of origin, or who had relationship breakups, tended to decide to go back. I also find that the mismanagement of COVID-19 and the mass death as a macro level shock from 2020, 2022 led a lot of people to become disenchanted about migration as well. At the meso level, I find that the anti-Asian hate crimes had the opposite effect. And it led a lot of, basically these were a lot of physical and verbal attacks on Chinese people and others who look Northeast Asian, that was recorded by Stop AAPI Hate 2021 3,800 times. And a lot of these crimes went underreported by the police. And here are just some examples of these that are in the book. And what I find is that instead of returning to China and their country of migrant origin, a lot of attacks that are accompanied with commands to go back to China led to a lot of psychological reactance, and a lot of potential migrants just change their routines and routes to work, learn more about their civil rights, purchase guns and other weapons to protect themselves, and become more involved in U.S. politics and society than they previously were. And some they enculturated more into U.S. society. I found that was also the case in Britain and Netherlands. So there was this unintended impact. Finally, I'm going to conclude with my last chapter. What can we gain from all this more knowledge about denial, deterrence, and disenchantment, and the potential immigrants who do not immigrate? What I find is that the under-researched retain and repel forces often overpower push and pull forces, making many potential migrants ambivalently immobile or causing them to give up on immigrating. And although many immigrants, due to their immediate presence, demand our attention due to the marginalization of society, potential immigrants have remained outside the margins of our awareness. And this raises epistemological questions about the limits of our knowledge. Can we truly understand international migration dynamics with mostly data and knowledge and theory about immigrants, or should we bring in corresponding data, knowledge, and theory about potential immigrants to transform how we perceive, understand, and value international migration? Every week, the media reports on spectacles of how governments violently enforces its immigration law against the most vulnerable migrants, whether that's through violent deportation efforts, putting people in cages, and then people getting stopped at the caught at the border. Yet a lot of the interaction of people don't migrate due to this interaction of social forces that retain in the country of origin and repel people in the country of destination, interacting with these very cleverly designed immigration policies that only permit entry of potential immigrants with strong ties to their origin country, making it difficult for them to build ties in the destination country. These social ties and socioeconomic status make it difficult to overcome denial, deterrence, and disenchantment. And it's not certain or clear whether this attracts the potential migrants we most want and whether it deters the potential immigrants that we do not want. I show that these different migrants are socioeconomically stratified, with average per capita incomes of the disenchanted being most highest, below them, the immigrants, those slightly below them, those denied the visas, and those that are deterred substantially below them. And I guess what I want to close is by saying that if we don't understand what stops potential immigrants, how will we know how to attract them when we need them more? As fertility rates decline, as we have declining inequality between migrant origin and migrant destination countries, raising the odds of mutually bilateral benefits from international migration, and as human capital becomes more precious and valuable, will we not only value immigrants, but also these potential immigrants that have hence until now just haunted us as desirable human capital that can enrich our societies further? Will we stop either taking migration for granted or as an ongoing thing that we don't pay attention to, or treating it as an exceptional event or crisis? And can we incorporate our epistemological awareness not only with those on the margins who demand our attention, but those who exist outside the margins of our awareness? You can pre-order the book, or if you can't afford it, refer it to your university library with this QR code. And I want to thank all the survey participants, especially those unable to legally visit the U.S. and other countries of migrant destination, to which I dedicate the book, my awesome survey assistants who were photographed here in front of the what used to be the U.S. Embassy in Chengdu, and my funders. And you're welcome to email me any questions if you have them, and I'm open for Q&A. Thank you very much. Okay, I'll stop sharing, and then you can see me. And you can see all of us. Great. And let me move over here so they can see me better. Because I think most of that was just a voice. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. My name is Claudia from ISCTE, and we have an immigration observatory also.
Okay, nice.
So we were very glad for this talk and to know your book, because as you mentioned and you demonstrated, it's very pioneer to go so deep why people don't migrate. Mm-hmm. I found very pertinent the three principles, and also the deepness of the visas that research that you're done, and especially in the second one, deterrence. One of the things that many times the research and also myself, I'm very curious, is why two people in the same position, one migrates and another one does not migrate. For instance, two nurses who just finished university, one of them decides to migrate to another country, and both don't get a job. One of them decides to migrate, and one decides not to migrate. And in that sense, your push-pull model was very interesting to understand some reasons that I'd like to go deeper, and if you can also now speak a bit, because you mentioned aging parents and other factors, but because I was trying to harmonize with everything, if you could go to that specifically,
Yeah.
as well. And because in the Portugal is one of the 20 countries in the world in terms of percentage with more people migrated. So 22% of our population is emigrated since the end of the 19th century that started.
Right.
So we are almost all of us is someone who migrated.
Yeah.
And we are very curious, and I'm very curious and research on who does not migrate. So then specifically the deterrence, if you could go deeper, not go deeper, explain again the push retain and push repel model that I found very pertinent. Yes.
Yeah.
So maybe just we collect 3 questions. So
2 questions. Okay.
3, if you don't mind.
3. Okay. So
Someone on the room on the
yes, Habibur Rahman.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hello.
You can unmute. Yeah.
Hello. Hi everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, I think so.
Yes. We
Can
can
you
hear
hear
you. Speak. Yeah, speak loud.
Okay, perfect. I'm little bit sick. I'm sorry for my voice. But thank you so much, Jacob. That's a very interesting presentation. Like alongside with the push and pull factors, you were explaining that how the emotional and psychological barrier actually impact a person not being immigrant in a country. So this is a very insightful discussion, but I have some questions and observation. First of all, in your theoretical context, did it on constraint in some geographical area? For example, like you focus on the China, but what happens if you focus global South? If you think about the economical factor that you excluded in your theoretical context, like do you still think that when economical factor will affect a person, you will still think about emotional barriers, or emotional barriers will play an important role when economic factors will affect? So that's one of my questions. And I have few more questions. Should I go, or you will answer first, then I will go on the next one?
Maybe you can go and just if you just quickly.
Yeah, just quickly. Go ahead.
Okay. The second one is about the deterrence and denial. So when you are talking about the deterrence, do you think it's a choice from the immigrant? Because I'm thinking like the refusal of the visa and deportation, it's also the choice from the institution, right? So in this case, do you think it's like a choice or it's imposed by the institutional decision? And also, like it's very interesting to see your immobility paradox. But again, like when we see that the immobility paradox, like it actually like for some cases, for example, the family ties, like it also helps people to go for like other countries. At the same time, it also like work as a barrier, right? So it works both the cases. But when we think about the theoretical implementation, do you think that it's contradict itself? But because you are saying that something, a factor or variable that influence for the immigrant, or at the same time, you are saying that it also deterrence or like barriers for immigration. And also my last question.
Sure, very short because we have more questions. Very quick and brief. Okay, thank you.
Okay, the last one is like when you apply this theory in practically, like do you think that the outcomes would be so diverse because you are treating with the emotional intelligence, or the outcome would be like varies so much person to person? So when you did your study, did you have any challenges about the outcomes? That's my question. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So maybe since we had 2 questions in one,
Yeah, that was a lot. Yeah, okay. Yeah, that was a lot. Okay, so for starters, it's really nice that, and I'm not surprised in some ways that from what I know about this country and its history of migration, that this would be the world premiere debut of presentation of my book, because I'm going to do it in many other countries. But I know about Portugal, and I know, I mentioned one of the first groundbreaking studies about immobility was done by Johan Carling about the Cabo Verde migrants. And I actually just went to Cabo Verde last week. And it was so interesting that because I just went there, like I didn't even know what Cabo Verde was. And I was flying from Tunisia to Bissau, and then I saw this place called Praia. It was a stop. I'm like, what's Praia? Praia? Like, what's that? And then I ended up I'm like, oh my God, Cape Verde. It was like, I didn't even know where it was on the map. Even I've traveled most of the world. I didn't know. And I realized, oh, I should go there. Like that's what, so it's made famous for that reason. So yeah, I mean, I think there's some countries, I think Canada is a similar situation compared to the US, because so many people go to US and then they go to Canada. So they have a more sensitivity. I think I have a uniquely US perspective and background, and that I think we think of so much of like international migration being like a sponge. But your question was about you wanted me to elaborate on parents and
Parents,
Mhm.
people in the same position don't emigrate. Like
Yeah.
Yes, like
Mhm.
one of the reasons that they also mentioned is that someone who migrates usually already has networks, whether in the family or friends, and others on them. Other times people also migrate because of aging parents, and then you add other factors there.
Mhm.
Yes.
Yeah. So, there's this role of like filial piety that might play a role where, for example, this participant, Joanne, she would talk about how well, actually, even better example would be Yoon, uh, who talks about how she was kind of torn between her parents being open-minded, but then on the other hand, they face all this criticism from other people about migrating abroad. And I think what comes out in some of these interviews is that families are that people are they don't want to burden their family, they don't want to burden their parents, and they feel like it would be such a violation of their social ties. And she says at the end that she just wants to run away, but she also says that if I were to migrate, if I were to just migrate and run away, my dad would disown me, right? And she laughed, and it was kind of this uncomfortable laugh. And there's this kind of fear. But there's another person, for example, there was one gay man who his parents just didn't understand his homosexuality, and then he ended up basically marrying his fiancée, but he had to do it very clandestinely. I think it's maybe a sense for him that he just didn't have any social support anyway, and he didn't feel like he could be himself. I mean, this is a complex question. What I don't find, if you can look at my denial models, when we're thinking about, the extent to get to the other question about the policy, the whether they have a parent who's 60 years old or older doesn't seem to be statistically significant whether they get a visa. But in this model, if they have more siblings, they are less likely to get the visa. And those other siblings can care for the other parents. So that might be from the eyes of the officer, like something that could be important. but yeah, I mean, I think this is a complex kind of story. And to get to the question about the, this is not in a slide here, but to get into the question that was asked before by Raman, I just think that if he's here still, I didn't see him. But oh, he's still there. Okay. So basically, he asked, like, why not just look at this for the entire global South? Well, the main reason is methodological nationalism. That I was told when you do it, if I'm going to do a study about this, I should only focus on one country. I actually started this project, and my hope is that this will. Why did I look at China? There were many reasons. I don't want to list all of them, but one of the major reasons that there's so much data, so many people. A small percentage of Chinese go abroad, but it's so many people. So they go everywhere. So. And it's one of those countries that there's a long line to get an immigrant visa, like Mexico, like Philippines, like India, like a lot of countries. And therefore, a lot of people would be tempted to just get a non-immigrant visa and overstay. And what I also, in the pilot research for this study, for this visa applicant part of the study, the denial portion, I actually did collect some pilot data in Mexico, Haiti, Dominican Republic, Philippines, quite a bit in Philippines, in India. And I just found it was easiest to do in China. The other thing is 10 to 20 years ago, there was this huge China boom in research. And there was a lot of money from both China's government and US government to study China. China was very sexy at the time I was doing my PhD. And so I just figured, oh, I'll just do China. The last reason is that I figured if China is so culturally, economically, and politically different from the United States, that I figured if I can do this study in China, I can do it anywhere. As to why I don't do this in the rest of the global South, why don't we? I mean, that's the point of me publishing this book. I'm hoping to inspire other younger scholars to do the similar sort of studies, and not to necessarily demonstrate that what I found about China is true elsewhere. That's fine if you do. But I'm also taking the more Burroway extended case method approach. I'm fine if you want to also do similar studies and extend the theory to show it's different in this India, it's different in Philippines, it's different in these other contexts. If we had data, and I just encourage you to collect the data with the same questions that I did, because if you do, then we can start to build multi-level models, and we can see how the country level fact traits and the individual level traits might be interacting, which would be very fascinating. I feel like I only answered one of those questions, but yeah, and feel free to email me your questions and I can answer if you don't get a chance to ask. So let's take some more.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Academic sciences. Thanks for this, and apologies, I missed the first couple minutes.
Yeah.
So it's possible that you kind of like presented the overarching umbrella through which you built this project. And you kind of like started already answering the question that I had in mind now, when you spoke a little bit about the reasons why you did the study that you did and not something else. But still, I was wondering, since it seems to be a very ambitious, but also very situated, very specific study of what many migration scholars consider to be kind of an exceptional case of the Muslim minority, of Chinese in the US, like the whole Integrado, etc. So how are you trying to generalize, basically? And if so, what do you do? Like, how do you situate this in which scholarship or which literature? Because you mentioned like carving or kind of task, or kind of like that. Those people that are very a European tradition of looking at migration and integration in a certain way, but then obviously your empirical work is elsewhere.
Yeah.
So just to understand how you reconcile kind of this sociological quantitative survey data And what do you do with a very fast changing international relations, political science moving space?
Yeah.
In which, like, this does not seem to be a historical thing, but like the data that you have now may well no longer apply in 6 years after COVID, in a situation in which the Chinese-US relationships have radically changed.
Yeah.
So I realize this is very broad.
Yeah,
But it's just kind of to understand where you're coming to, what kind of space, and the claims that you're trying to make, where are you trying to contribute them to?
Yeah. So there have been, okay.
Also connected to these. Thank you very much for your talk. I also learned a lot because also I'm not a immigration scholar, I'm a social movement scholar. So forgive me if I say something that doesn't sound very connected to the field. But I guess connected a bit to what Tina was saying. So yeah, it seems to be very specific focus on the United States. So why people do not migrate to the United States? So maybe they would like to migrate to another place. So it's why many do not immigrate to the United States.
Yeah.
And also, so they potentially would migrate to another place, and another point is why you study why they do not immigrate and why do they do not emigrate.
Yeah.
There is a difference between.
Yeah. I mean, it's more looking overall at why people don't immigrate and settle down. Because one of these types of people, I think in the end, I decided not to use the word migrate because I think migrate just means like moving around, but actually like becoming an immigrant, becoming a member of the society. Because the third group, the disenchanted, they start and then they go back. And so the title is strategically avoiding using the word China or Chinese because from what I observe and suspect that once you do that, you get all the China scholars reading your work and then no one else. Or maybe people that are in the sort of same space, like IR people who are concerned about security. I want this, the ambition is to develop a generalizable theory with the China case. And as I was kind of suggesting, a lot of the things, I go against a lot of the scholars, the China scholars, and that a lot of China scholars, I feel like their approach to social science is, let's apply a Western theory and show it's not true in China. And, oh, look, it's not true. And I would rather take data that happens to come from China and try to build a generalizable theory, but whether it generalizes, its external validity is still open for testing. But let's take this as possibly applicable to other societies. And like I said, I feel that a lot of migrant origin societies have a lot more in common with China than they do migrant destination societies. And I think we're coming to appreciate that more and more. The geopolitical landscape has obviously changed. It's always going to be changing. And therefore, we need to revisit the case of China, and as well as, within the same time period, we can see how is this different than India? How is this different from Russia? How is this different from Indonesia or whatever large United States now? People leaving United States. I mean, this is more related to my next book about which will be about the migration out of Hong Kong and how people decide whether to adapt to an autocratizing society or migrate to an unfamiliar culture. But yes, everywhere, like these sort of dynamics, I think are prevalent. And I think there's a problem in always treating China as exceptional, as different, without sort of understanding like what can we learn more generally from China, but also holding out. Yes. Now, it's true that as a U.S. citizen, I was most concerned with the difficulties of people because of the demands of immediacy. I was most concerned about the inability of people who hosted me to visit me in California. And obviously, United States, if you look at, I have a histogram of where the ex-immigrants try to immigrate into, and there's I think there's 16 different countries. most of them in Europe, actually, but most of them went to the US, unsurprisingly. So a lot of these people don't only want to go to the US, they want to go to many places. They're open. I mean, a lot of people in migrant-oriented countries, they're not even necessarily thinking, I got to get to Germany. They just want to get out, just want to go somewhere that's, they think is better. But in the second chapter, the problem with a lot of those other embassies, what's great about the US Embassy from a methodological standpoint is that everybody has to go into the US Embassy. So I had very little coverage bias in sampling at the exit, where all the people are walking out. I was getting everybody who was applying for US Embassy in, say, Beijing or Chengdu. So I was able, with assistance, to interview them in Chinese, or if they insisted English, and I was able to get a lot of data in a very short amount of time. The problem with a lot of the, as you may know, if you're familiar with the work of Federica Infantino, her studies of how her ethnographies of how the Schengen visa embassies operate, what they do is they usually have people apply at these visa application centers, and then they're usually located in these shopping malls, and they're very hard to be doing a survey in like a shopping mall or like a commercial privately owned area. And I just decided it also there wasn't any requirement for a lot of people go in for an interview. So there's a lot of bias there in terms of sampling if I were to do like a large sample. And then even if I was like Infantino and I got into a Schengen visa and I was able to actually observe cases, it'd be a relatively small sample compared to what I could get outside of the embassy. So then what do I do? Well, one of my reviewers said, I want to know it because she's based in France. I think she's Italian. And she said, I really want you to tell me what's going on in other countries. So what I did is I scraped a lot of social media, Chinese social media data, and I got a lot of stories. And I found that in the last part of chapter 2, I talk about how a lot of the same sort of observations about who gets the visa also hold for Schengen embassies, Australian embassy, Canadian embassy, and so on. So it isn't all about the US, but the primary quantitative survey data set is people applying at the US embassy and its consulate in Chengdu and the embassy in Beijing. But then there's all this text data I have too, digital social text data where I could see like similar sort of stories of people being denied at other countries' embassies. Yeah. Someone would like to know how power imbalance. Herman Mojito. Okay, Mojito. I would like to know how power imbalance was dealt with between China and US in terms of institutions that deal with visa processes. And for the case of the Global South, we normally face the imbalance between developed and low-income countries where we spend a lot of money and time, and our visas are always rejected. For example, you get a scholarship, you apply for a visa. When you write to the institution, they promise to write to the embassy, but with no power to overturn and influence the visa process. How did you encounter the power imbalance during your research? There's something called the plenary power doctrine in the United States that basically says that visa decisions made by the Department of State are diplomatic decisions, and they're not judicially reviewable. They're not under judicial review. I'm pretty sure it's probably similar in Europe. There's some cases. I interviewed the head of all consulates under Obama about this, and she said, as is widely known, there are occasionally congressional inquiries if a person has the political capital to people in Congress enough to raise an issue about a high-profile visa if it gets in the media. But I wager that for the sort of people you're talking about, it's very rare. We're seeing more rejections by the US government. And normally a lot of institutions that are high profile, say University of Chicago, they will make sure that their students get admitted. But now we're hearing, and in the past, I've talked to people who work in international studies offices, like the one who worked head of the one at U Chicago, and she said that we can usually, our student visa applicants are usually not rejected, but if they're applying to study at a community college, probably it's more likely they can get rejected, and the institution will help them. So I guess it really depends on the political influence of your institution, but these sort of like congressional inquiries, and I don't know if you have anything equivalent in Europe. I feel like most of the human rights cases are pertaining to cases that are dealing with issues within the EU that aren't happening, in Africa or whatever. So my assumption is that this is often not considered by the governments to be a political issue. It's an administrative foreign policy, immigration policy administered by the Foreign Ministry or the Department of State. But that said, since this is a politics and political action kind of seminar, it's interesting to think about this phenomenon in more political terms. And I often get this sort of work, particularly with the visa applicants, rejected by political science journals, in which they say that this is not political, this is not politics, this is about policy. This should go to a public administration journal. Anybody else? In the virtual room, do we have any more questions? Let's see. But I did also, I think people are aware of the power imbalance, but you have to be aware that this is in a society where people don't have many rights to the first place. So they're not like, I had one sociologist of law that once looked at my project and he said, this is a problem of people not standing up for their rights. And that he works in the US, and that might be true like in the US context, but it wouldn't quite resonate with a lot of my Chinese interviewees and surveyed people, participants, because they don't really think in those terms when it comes to what the US Embassy's decision. They don't feel like they have any rights. They don't have rights for their own government. They certainly don't have rights to the US government or another EU country government. So that's how I would address the question of the power imbalance for Herman. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. He's just saying, cool. Thank you. Yeah. And I just so you know, I almost became a political scientist. I actually was planning on doing that, and then I applied to 10 programs in poli-sci, 10 in sociology. I think I got into 5 and 5, and at the end of the day, I went to UCLA to sociology program, both because it was very strong in migration. I almost went to study with Alexander Wendt because I was into constructivism at Ohio State. But in the end, I decided that sociologists consider a wider range of phenomenon. And although sociologists had the problem of being too focused on immigrants, and I would have to get them to look at potential immigrants, there was more opportunity to think about this in terms of social stratification, migrant selectivity, and even political sociology, like the limited capacity of the government to control migration, but from a different point of view than political scientists and political sociologists of migration have previously looked at.
Seminars of kind of looking at the mirrors of the issue. The topics like why people do not participate, why people do not mobilize, why people do not radicalize. Book by Tina. So I think it's a very, very important perspective.
That's interesting. Why people? So I just so you know, I don't know if you know of Attila Melik, but Attila Melik is one of the heads in Hungary of a large research project called Protest. The word "test" is capitalized, and it's Yeah, do you know about that one? It's a Horizon EU funded project. Yeah, and he's looking at they've been, and I'm part of it too, but like court peripheral part of it. It's around 10 country project, and they collected all this data. And when Attila was presenting his data in Hungary, he was talking about people's biographies and how they became involved in these social movements. And my question for them, and him and the rest of them who were so deep in this data is, okay, but you're selecting on the dependent variable here. I mean, you're looking at why these small sample of individuals became the leaders in these protest movements, but like, how can we really know that fully without looking at the people that did it? That was my main challenge with that. So I think even a lot of these large projects that spend so much time like collecting data on positive cases of something like protesters, protest leaders, radicalized social movement actors could benefit by looking at talking to people and asking, there's plenty of them, like people that aren't politically involved, like why aren't, what is your story? How is it different from the person who got so involved? And just comparing, and then maybe you have more insight. That would be an advice to a student doing a project like that.
Okay, so thank you so much.
Thank you.
We can close here.
All right.
It was great. I am quite in terms of the engagement of the audience, so it was interesting. And thank you for coming.
Yeah.
We upload the video on the webpage.
Okay.
And then we send you the video.
Nice.
So although you just for the colleagues, you can stop the recording if you want.